Warning: the following podcast may discuss topics of violence that may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome back to Above and Beyond. As always, I'm your host, Philip Kesterson, and tonight we have a special episode in store. And that is because, instead of just covering one subject on this week's episode, we are actually going to be covering 5. And these 5 subjects are going to be looking at a different aspect of warfare, as tonight's episode is part 1 of a series I will be doing on military animals. And since I don't really have any housekeeping tonight, we're just going to get right into it. Animals have been used in warfare for thousands of years. They have been used from anywhere from scouting to riding to carrying equipment. They range from horses to dogs and bats to dolphins. Some animals have characteristics that allow them to be fundamental for the art of war. And that is correct. You did hear me say dolphins. So I guess that means that they have a certain purpose in warfare. Get out of here, you stupid cricket. You're not being covered in tonight's episode. Animals in warfare can receive a medal called the Dickin Medal, which was first introduced in 1943, and it's actually been called the Animal Victorian Cross. It's given to animals who, well, quite frankly, they go above and beyond their expectations in combat or just in military in general. Horses have always been the number one animal that have been used. The Mongols used them for lightning-fast attacks and became excellent archers from their backs. At the 1683 siege of Vienna, the siege was broken when the Polish winged hussars led the largest cavalry charge in history to save the besieged city. Julius Caesar allegedly had a faithful horse named Genitor with human-like fingers, and Robert E. Lee, of course, had his famed horse Traveler. Now, the reason they were used is because they were fast, they were strong, they were reliable. They could cover any terrain that they wanted to, and they could break lines due to their massive size in some instances. The next most common used animal is, of course, a dog. Now, this is because they are loyal, they are superb hunters, they're really good at tracking, they're very smart. Some breeds of animals have been compared to toddlers and small children in terms of their intellectual ability. And another reason they were used is because they are fierce. They are strong and fierce, and in some instances, they're very terrifying. In this series, I'm going to do as much research as I can to try and dig up the obscure stories of animals in warfare. Some you may have heard, some you may not have. Some I didn't even think of existing, but it kind of makes sense when I started looking into it. The way that I'm going to break these down is I'm going to try to keep it at 5 animals an episode. I think I can fit that many in my allotted time. And if you enjoyed this episode, and you do want to hear more of it, please let me know so I have the feedback so I know whether or not to push this series forward. Now, I am going to reiterate the warning at the top of the show again. Some people are sensitive to animals being harmed, and much like their human counterparts, sometimes animals do get killed in combat. So I would like to say again that listener discretion is advised. Now, the first animal we are going to talk about in this series is a bear by the name of Wojtek. On April 8, 1942, a group of Polish POWs were being transported through the Middle East when they discovered this bear cub. Now, they took the lonely cub, where he would spend the next 3 months in a refugee camp on the outskirts of Tehran. Now, a pact was signed by the Allied forces around this time in 1942 that allowed these POWs to be released to fight in the European campaign. The Poles were shipped out, and of course, they brought the bear cub along with them. Now, from here, he was donated to the 2nd Transport Company, where he officially received the name Wojtek, spelled Wojtek, which roughly translates to Happy Warrior. He also received plenty of training while he was with the soldiers, including how to march, how to properly salute. He would obviously socialize with his fellow soldiers. He wrestled with them. He smoked, or rather ate cigarettes. What I mean by that is they would light a cigarette for him, they would hand it to him, he would take a couple puffs of it, and then he would just swallow it. I know, it's ridiculous. He would also wander around the barracks at night and look for soldiers who looked like they were cold, and then he would snuggle up with them for warmth. And, of course, being that they were from Eastern Europe, he would drink with them. he would reportedly stare into the bottoms of empty bottles and just let out this huge sigh when he finished one. And when the 2nd Transport Company was renamed to the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, Wojtek's duty changed. He was no longer allowed to just wander around and socialize with the men. He now had a job. The company was attached to the British 8th Army, and unfortunately, British regulations for transport ships officially forbade animal mascots being aboard them. To get around this, the Polish officially enlisted Wojtek into the army as a private, and this gave him his own serial number, his own rank, his own rations, and it even gave him pay. During the Battle of Monte Cassino from January to May of 1944, Wojtek would carry 100-pound crates of ammunition and was even recorded to have not only carried shells to artillery pieces, but also having loaded and firing them on some occasions. For his service during the battle, he would be promoted to corporal, and the 22nd Company's official patch now bears, no pun intended, an image of him carrying an artillery shell. Wojtek would go on to survive the war and was transported with the rest of the 22nd Company to Scotland. From here, he was given to the Edinburgh Zoo, where he would live out the remainder of his years before passing on December 2nd, 1963. So that's the first animal we're going to talk about. I think in terms of animals that served in combat, I feel like Wojtek the bear is actually one of the more popular ones. Before I did this episode, I asked some people if they've ever heard about him, and quite a few actually have. They just didn't know specifically his name or who he served. They just knew that he was a bear that had served in the military. What he did, it's incredible, the things that he did, and it's hilarious that when he would down these bottles of alcohol, he would just let out this big sigh until he was given another one. It's like a baby having a milk bottle taken away from him. Now, the next animal we're going to talk about is a personal favorite of mine, and that is Jackie the baboon. Now, Jackie was a companion of a South African man named Albert Marr, and sometime between 1910 to 1915, Albert had found Jackie hiding in a barn on their family farm. And he brought him inside because supposedly it was storming that night, and he was just a baby, so he didn't want to leave him out here, so he took him in, and the two very quickly became inseparable, and he was quickly made a part of the Marr family. Now, in 1914, of course, we all know World War I breaks out, and in 1915, Marr is drafted into the military, but he does not want to leave Jackie behind. So much to his surprise, his commanding officers actually allowed Jackie to come with him and become the mascot for Marr's regiment, which was the 3rd South African Infantry. Jackie was eventually made a private and was issued his own custom uniform, his own ration set, and again, even his own pay. Now, while serving with Marr, he learned how to drill, he learned how to march, he knew which officers to salute to, which ones not to, and he would even stand at attention when it was called. He was also used as a sentry for any of the places that they were posted, because baboons have heightened senses, so it allowed him to hear enemies coming before anybody in his regiment would. Now, Jackie's first major taste of battle happened during the Battle of Agagia on February 26, 1916. During this, his best friend, Albert Marr, caught a bullet to the shoulder, and Jackie had actually administered a bandage to him and licked his wound and tried to tend to it until help arrived, which is incredible. And then again, during the Battle of Delville Wood, from July to September of 1916, British casualties for this battle were well over 80%, but somehow Jackie and Marr both managed to survive, which is also ridiculous. At one point during his time in the trenches of France, he and the rest of the 3rd were under heavy German enemy machine gun fire, and Jackie began frantically trying to build a wall around himself and some of his fellow soldiers, but a piece of shrapnel from an explosion hit him in the arm and the leg. And when they attempted to take him off the field, he refused and tried to finish building the wall around his men because he wanted to protect them. When he was eventually treated, his leg had to be amputated, and doctors were just flabbergasted as to how he could survive, 1, being hit, and then 2, the actual amputation. For his actions during the war and for trying to protect his unit during that battle, he was awarded the Medal of Valor and promoted to the rank of corporal. He would survive the rest of the war, but sadly, he passed during a house fire in May of 1921. Now, this story was one of my favorites, mainly because I love the image of him in his own little uniform. If you're a follower of the Facebook page, if you go on there when I post this episode, I'm posting a picture going along with each animal. Look at the one of Jackie. He's all looking all spiffy in his little uniform, and it must be taken after the war because he also has his leg amputated in the picture, but it's hilarious to me that they gave him his own uniform. Now, before we go on to the third animal, I'm going to stop for a word from our sponsors. So now we're going to talk about the third animal. In my opinion, this animal is the MVP of this list. Her name is Sally Ann Jarrett, and she was an American Staffordshire Terrier that was given to Captain William R. Terry of I Company in the 11th Pennsylvania Infantry of the Union Army during the American Civil War. Now, she was born in the spring of 1861 and given to the captain by a resident of Westchester, Pennsylvania, while the unit was at a training camp in the area. Her name comes from a combination of a young girl whom Captain Terry admired and the regiment's original commander, Colonel Found Jarrett. Now, much like her predecessors in this episode, Sally learned to march alongside her fellow soldiers and knew when to drill and how to do it. She would follow them on all their drills and knew where to be when certain bugles sounded. On 2 separate occasions, she marched alongside the regiment during pass and review in front of President Abraham Lincoln, and any time that they marched, she found herself at the head of the column alongside the company's commander. The 11th Pennsylvania saw action at Cedar Mountain, the Second Battle of Bull Run, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, the Battle of the Wilderness, and Petersburg, and she was with them at every single battle. She never shied from battle and would stand at the end of the firing line and ferociously bark at enemies that she saw. I read once that during the Battle of Antietam, Confederate forces were flanking the 11th Pennsylvania, and she turned at them and started barking, and that alerted some of the guys to fire. So she single-handedly refused a Confederate flank by alerting her men to the presence, which is awesome. During the first day of battle at Gettysburg on July 1st, 1863, she got separated from the 11th. Now, they presumed that she was dead, and they were extremely worried about her. But once the battle was over a few days later, she was found at their original position from the first day, and she was found protecting some wounded men from the 11th alongside some of the other dead comrades that she had. A year later, at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse in May of 1864, she was shot in the neck, but was treated, and she survived. The surgeons couldn't get the bullet out of her exactly, so they just had to wait until it fell out on its own, and a couple months later, it actually did. However, during the Battle of Hatcher's Run in February of 1865, the 11th was ordered to charge a Confederate position, and she charged with them because that's what she did. She was a badass. Now, while they were charging, she was unfortunately struck and killed instantly by a bullet. But disregarding enemy fire, some of the 11th actually stopped, laid their rifles down, and buried her on the spot with full honors. In 1890, veterans from the 11th erected a monument in Gettysburg, and Sally finds herself in a permanent spot at the base of it. If you ever get a chance to go up there, it's a beautiful monument. It's one of my favorite. At the top has this soldier in the infantry pointing a rifle, and then at the bottom of it is, of course, Sally laying in all of her bronze glory. Now, the reason that I say that Sally is the MVP of this episode is because her loyalty knew no bounds. Like, she would charge with them. I mean, obviously she did because she was shot while charging with them at one point. She would bark at any Confederate she saw. At one point, she was even reported to have attacked a couple of Confederates and saved a couple of her comrades, on top of, like I said, refusing the flank of the 11th at Antietam in 1862. It's phenomenal. Like, we truly do not deserve dogs, I tell you that. Now, next on our list is Simon the cat. Now, Simon was a cat that was picked up by Seaman George Hickenbottom while his ship, the HMS Amethyst, was docked in Hong Kong in March of 1948. Now, Hickenbottom smuggled him aboard the ship, where he became popular as he would handle the ship's rodent problem. The ship was infested with rats, and Simon would use his time to go around and disperse of them. However, some did not find it amusing that he would leave some of these dead rats in their cots, and the original captain of the ship initially was not okay with him because his hat was always full of hair, because that was Simon's favorite sleeping spot, and I love that. When the ship received a new commander, he was given the task of relieving another ship around Nanjing. Now, while traveling up a river to relieve the other ship, a Chinese field gun opened fire on the frigate, and one of the first shells tore through the walls, went straight through the captain's quarter, and struck Simon directly. But he survived, and he crawled to the top deck and was treated by medical staff, and they treated him for burns. They pulled about 4 or 5 pieces of shrapnel from him. He recovered, and while he was recovering, he spent time visiting other sailors who were wounded during the attack, and it greatly boosted morale. He then resumed his post of removing rodents from the ship. In 1948, he became sick from an infection that got around his wounds, and he was placed in quarantine. And despite the efforts of medical staff, This time, there was nothing they could really do for him. He had contracted, like I said, the viral infection from his wounds, and he succumbed to them on November 28th, 1949. Now, over his short career, he had gained popularity among British sailors and even back in the British homeland. And when he died, the entire crew of the Amethyst, along with hundreds and hundreds of others, attended his funeral. Now, one of my favorite things about this story is for his actions in pest control and raising morale, Simon was awarded the Dickens Medal, the Blue Cross Medal, and the Amethyst Campaign Medal, and given the rank of Able Sea Cat. As of 2021, as of this recording, which is on October 4th, 2021, he is the only cat to have ever received the Dickens Medal, which, like I said at the beginning of the show, the Dickens Medal is the animal version of the Victorian Cross given to animals who go above and beyond the call of duty. Now, the last animal we're going to talk about in this episode is Mary the Exeter. Now, Mary was a pigeon used by the British during World War II to get crucial information from the mainland Europe back across the Channel to her home in England. Now, through World War I and World War II, pigeons were used extensively to deliver messages because their natural homing ability to get back to where they came from. Plus, they were fast, they were small targets, it was hard to hit them. During her career from 1940 to 1945, she made 4 successful flights from France to England. There really wasn't much info on her. I looked on the Dickens Medal website because she also received the Dickens Medal, and I couldn't really find that much, but I felt it necessary to include her in an episode because of some of the things that she survived. For instance, on 3 of her missions, she was wounded, and throughout her career, she received 22 stitches. Now, the circumstances of how she received her wounds are phenomenal. The first time she was wounded was from a German warhawk. The Germans would train these hawks during World War I and World War II specifically to target pigeons, as they were usually carrying messages that would help their enemies. And in one instance, this hawk attacked Mary over the Pass de Calais, gashing her throat and her right breast, but Mary managed to fight him off and pecked his eye out. And the hawk was like, nah, I ain't about this life, and then flew off. Another time she was wounded was when a German shot her with a shotgun. And the only reason we know this is because she returned from one of her trips with part of her wing missing and had 3 or 4 pellets pulled from her torso. Despite being shot, she was recorded as being in high spirits and returned to service within a short time and with a shortened wing. The third time she was wounded was when she was hit from shrapnel from a grenade, and that again tore her throat open, but she was given a collar to help her neck stay up. And the fourth and final time was during a Luftwaffe raid, which was the German Air Force, on her hometown of Exeter. She, along with other pigeons, were being housed in this one building, and a bomb from the Luftwaffe hit it and blew it up and completely leveled it. Well, almost all of the pigeons died with the exception of her and 3 others. And with all the stuff that she went through, she earned the nickname Indestructible Pigeon, and on November 20th, 1945, she was awarded the Dickens Medal. Now, much like Wojtek the bear, she also died of natural causes and passed sometime in 1950. It was kind of unclear when exactly it was. Now, those are the 5 animals that I'm going to cover in this first part of this episode. As I said at the beginning of the show, I do plan on making this a series. I would love to have your feedback on this episode. If you like this kind of thing, I will do way more of it in the future. If you don't, let me know, and I won't do more of it in the future. And to leave your feedback, you can either email me at above.beyondpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that is above.beyondpodcast@gmail.com. Or you can pop on over at the Facebook page at facebook.com/aboveandbeyondpodcast. And you can rate and review the show. You can message me directly from there. And just let me know what you think of the episode. Let me know what you think of the whole series. Give me suggestions for people you'd like for me to cover. Or, since I said I'm doing this as a series, you can leave suggestions for other animals that you know of that I can cover. As always, I'm your host, Philip Kesterson. Thank you for joining me this week, and I will see you next week on Above and Beyond.